What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe. I like to say you are blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. It took some time, but we're finally broadcasting. Amen. It took a minute, but Black Lady Magic is back and fired up. And we don't even have a chance to catch up on what they've been doing because we have a limited time because of technical challenges, but we'll save updates for our next epic conversation. First up, you know what? Let's get Ms. Leah Miller to start first because the hair's changed, her profile picture has changed, she's getting into new languages. So what is up, Leah Miller? Talk to me.
Hey, it's good to be back. I've definitely missed our Black Lady Magic nights, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about all my changes the next time we are together. Tonight's topic is going to basically be about all the things that we're seeing in the media with the women coming forward against Kavanaugh and other women coming forward against Cosby, and sort of not so much those cases specifically, but just the phenomena of women coming forward maybe years after they've been victimized, and how society, instead of embracing and supporting that woman, turns on her and demeans her and tries to belittle her and re-victimize her all over again. And I wanted to sort of get a little bit into that topic and figure out why this is happening, especially in the era of the Me Too movement and in the era of why I didn't report, and an era where there's a lot more awareness and discussions and open conversations about this type of sexual crime and victimization of women.
Excellent. Dr. Chetachi, how you been? What's been going on?
Oh, I've been all over the place. I've been good, though.
And the next mayor of Atlanta could be Dr. Chetachi, but that's a whole other conversation.
I believe it.
Yeah, so we have to make sure that you're back next week, Black Lady Magic, because there's a pile of things both of you have been doing, but because we're at a shortened edition tonight, we're going to get right to it. Leah, you wanted to chat about this conversation topic tonight. Start it off.
Sure. So basically, as I said, I wanted to talk about this because we're hearing a lot about the Cosby case right now. It just ended in a verdict and a conviction, and now all of these women coming out against the administration's pick for the next Supreme Court justice in Kavanaugh. And it made me think not so much about the abusers or the people that are being accused of the crime, but the people who are making these claims, and the way in which it seems as though society turns on those women and is basically trying to silence them again. In a way, it feels almost as though those women have been victimized twice. Once when they went through the initial act with the person who abused them, but then again by society and the media that excoriates them for having the courage to tell their truth. Whether or not they tell it at the time of it happening or 30 years later or 20 years later, I think is of little relevance, but that's becoming more the focus, like, well, if it really happened, why didn't you say something then? And turning things around on the victim again, which in my opinion, I think is just as damaging and just as difficult, and is just as much an abuse as the act itself. So I just thought it was be important to talk about, because I think that if we continue to move forward as a society where we're belittling and demeaning victims of crime and sexual abuse, well, who are we really? And what are we teaching younger generations who will find themselves, unfortunately, in these types of situations? It's just going to silence more and more generations, and we're never, ever going to come to a place of reconciliation and having abusers pay the price for their crimes, and having victims feel as though they have the support and advocacy to help them move beyond it, and not be afraid to share or tell what's happened to them.
Tachi, I know you have great views on this, not only from, in this case, a lady's perspective, but also a media perspective. Could you give your thoughts on both sides as a woman of color, and also from the media's way that they're getting into the victim blaming? It's not so much, obviously, Judge Kavanaugh is the main focus right now, but it's bigger than him. It's bigger than his situation.
Yes, that's just the latest in the continuing saga of let's abuse women in the society. And not only abuse them, legitimize that abuse and make it okay. And when you try to speak out against it, then victimize the person even further, as Leah mentioned. I think this is not to lump this in with other things because I can't stand when people do that, but this is the process, unfortunately, that let's talk about in the United States. That's the process that you go through in the United States with a lot of things when it comes to quote unquote oppressed or underrepresented people. There's this process of making the victim feel bad enough to drop their case or to forget about it or forgive or turn the other cheek. And this is what they don't realize is, especially in cases when it comes to sexual abuse or where you've been victimized physically and personally to that extent, turning the other cheek does not work. You can't ask somebody to just overlook and turn the other cheek. So what do? To save yourself, you victimize them further by saying they're lying, or why did it take you so long, or what were you doing there, or why were you wearing that? This absolves the person in question of any responsibility, or at least puts a reasonable doubt in the minds of others as to whether or not they're responsible for their actions. So that's what we're seeing. And I think the media is being, or media outlets, I should say, I hate when people lump them into the media because after all, we are the media as well using these platforms. So I think what people have done, or what media outlets have done, is they're being very careful about what they say with regard to these things because they're already under scrutiny for this supposed fake news, etc. So I think we're seeing a different approach in terms of the way media outlets handle this and other sexual misconduct and abuse and harassment cases because they're under the gun, whether rightfully so or not, they are under the gun. So they're being very careful. So you don't see this, or at least I'm not noticing an extreme victim blaming by media outlets. We're seeing it by other people who utilize the media to victimize these women further.
And I would only add to that, too, that I agree with Dr. Chachi that certain media outlets in their coverage of the story are giving space and voice to the individuals that are doing the victim blaming, which I think they themselves aren't necessarily doing the victim blaming, but they're spreading it further by giving voice to those individuals. And so, it isn't necessarily the media's fault, but because anyone can use media as a platform and they still have a story to tell, I think the media is used as a tool to further oppress the voices of these victims and repress them and make them voiceless and basically just push it aside. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Dr. Vibe, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Tachi, please.
Okay. So I just wanted to also add that it's even harder in this day and age because while they may have a handle on traditional linear media like television and newspapers, magazines, etc., social media is like the Wild West. So anyone, even if you are a traditional news outlet, any one of these people, any one of the reporters, whatever, could irresponsibly get on Twitter and put their own. Now, most of them are not doing that, but then you have some from particular news outlets, I won't say what they are, but you can guess, who have a very particular way of looking at things. And so they will, this comes from the top down. We have somebody that happens to occupy 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue who says what the hell he likes on social media. Why would the rest of the country not follow suit? So we've started this whole age of say whatever the hell you like on social media and there'll be no repercussions. So even in these cases, you see that. So it's difficult to wrangle in social media. So that's the other thing I wanted to add. While the traditional linear media may have some level of handle and may suffer some repercussions from advertisers if you say the wrong thing, social media doesn't have that same beholdenness to the truth. So,
but what about the premise of innocent until proven guilty? A lot of people will say that the media takes a stand, or society takes a stand, that once a person is accused, they're guilty.
No, I think that is a good premise, and that is why I believe that there is such a thing as due process. And I do believe that's why if someone makes a claim and an accusation against you, there does need to be some evidence this crime or of the allegation that you're making. But at the same time, that doesn't negate what the person is saying. Sometimes you can't prove things. There is no physical evidence or something 30 years after the fact, but it doesn't negate that person's experience or that perception that they have or the abuse that they suffered. So I think in the public, the court of public opinion, sometimes you are going to be guilty before you're even tried in an actual court. But I still do think the burden of proof is on the person who's making the claim. However, if you have person after person after person, regardless of the time frame that has elapsed between whatever it is that occurred and when they're coming forward with what happened to them, I do think there's got to be some truth to that. I think that there's always going to be one person's perspective, the other person's perspective, and the truth will be somewhere in the middle. But I refuse to allow process and procedure to negate what people are saying and the larger importance of giving space and voice for victims to be able to acknowledge their truth, experience it, share it with others to sort of not only unburden themselves of what's happened, but also to prevent individuals from getting away with it again. And like I said, a lot of these cases that have been getting media attention are cases where there are multiple plaintiffs, multiple victims. And the two cases that we've already talked about are no exception to that. So I do think that, every abuser or alleged abuser should have their day in court. But I do get in sort of the court of public opinion, it is what it is. Perception is what is reality. So whether or not it's actually true and whether or not there's actual proof, the perception is there. So there's not much you can do to control that.
Dr. Chetachi, anything you want to add on that?
I 100% agree with Leah. There's not that much that I have to add. Unfortunately, the court of public opinion kind of trumps what happens in this innocent until proven guilty thing. Especially, I would say, especially now where this is coming forward. When there are just so many, as Leah said. There are so many cases of women coming out with the same thing. So how many hundreds of these women corroborated on a story so this, okay, you're going to say this. It's impossible. I shouldn't say it's impossible. It's not probable. And so what's more probable is that the climate at the time allowed for abusers to run rampant with people turning their eyes away and turning their backs on it and saying nothing. This includes the Catholic Church. This includes the workplace. This includes all of that. And nothing was said because something was at stake, whether it was money, whether it was reputation. That's more probable. But because people do not like to be feel as if they're wrong, because people, it's incredible. This whole thing has brought to the surface how many liars there are. And I will say it, I'm not even going to say half truth. How many people just outright lie and lie to the point that they almost believe what they're saying is so. So it's really interesting. So that's all I would say in terms of that point.
It's very interesting because due process versus public process. We have, let's look at the Cosby case. Here's this man, 81 years old, now spending 3 years in prison. And is it justified? According to what Leah has said on this conversation, because there have been so many accusers, did he get his just due?
I feel like if a court found fit to convict him, then there was proof. They're not going to convict an innocent man, or in the best case scenario, an innocent person won't be convicted regardless of what someone says. They can't just convict someone based on he said, she said. Even if there is no smoking gun, and they do have enough, third party tangential evidence, they usually need more than that to go on. So my personal belief is that in the Cosby case specifically, if they were able to come up with a conviction, there was something there.
All right. Before Dr. Chetachi has Leah, I need you to move over the same way you did in the past. You're a little off.
Okay, this
that's
way?
Better. Yeah, that's better. Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Chetachi, what were your thoughts, I guess, from a media perspective on the way the Cosby trial was covered?
That's a good question. I I don't feel one way or the other about the actual media coverage of it. I think that, like everyone, the media was remiss in terms of covering things, because for some, this is not the first. This is not the first time that this has come up. This has come up before, and they covered it before. But I think sometimes there is the feeling or the slant that, well, either let's just see, wait and see what happens, or we'll just wait until everybody, excuse me, starts reporting, because nobody really wants to be the first in a sense with these things. But it took for, what is his name? Ronan Farrow to come out with that article in the New York Times against Weinstein for anything to be done. So somebody has to be the first, and then you start to see other people follow suit. But that's a really huge thing. You're going up against a media giant yourself, a writer, and you're still a journalist, you're still part of the media, but it takes a lot of courage and a lot of effort to do that. So that, to answer your question, we see, I would say we see a little bit of hesitation when it comes to these things, because again, these things have been in the works and in the makings for a long time. Why did it take so long for this to break? And honestly, all these other cases broke because of Weinstein. Because of the attention. Weinstein was the beginning of they had been there, but this was the beginning of the rolling effect, of the rolling snowball effect of this.
Well, so let me ask though, were the allegations of Cosby, did they come up before the allegations of Weinstein?
They had been there for years. So there were, if you remember, I can't remember how many years ago there was, but there were these allegations were brought up against Cosby years and years and years ago. Nothing ever really came of it. It just kind of got swept under the rug, because what it is society going on with business as usual, and nobody said anything. But under the surface, there were a lot of people who knew and just said nothing. And obviously I understand why, because there was something to lose. You didn't have, so it was only when Ronan Farrow came out with this, and then you started having people coming forward and corrupt. Now there's strength in numbers. So, that's when you start to have that effect. But this is not new. This has been, the allegations were there before the whole okay, we don't even know, because Weinstein's goes back as well. So if we're talking about when they first came to the public eye, we don't know what the chicken or egg situation is, because all of these had been brought up years ago. Nothing was done about it until Ronan Farrow came out with his New York Times piece.
Exactly.
Victim blaming, I'm going to be realistic here. I think it's going to continue on, because the ones who have the authority to change the narrative aren't changing it. Though a lot of times those individuals are the ones who either get accused or have a shield, so they're not accused.
It's true, and I would also say a lot of those that are in power that are accused, it seems like the modus operandi of the day now is just deny, deny, deny. I did nothing, I'm not gonna, and just basically negate the whole thing. Like, people ask you a question, I'm not gonna even honor that with an answer, because that's totally impossible. I could never do anything like that. So the best thing they do, the only thing that it seems like they're doing is deflecting, denying, and not answering questions. And so it just continues with the status quo. The issue is, at least what I'm hoping to see, is now with this resurgence of people supporting victims and trying to create a platform for them to use their voice by sharing their experiences in a safe way through the Me Too movement and others, that the pressure will not let up. What will happen is, if the people keep denying and saying, I didn't do anything, I'm not going to talk about it, I'm not going to, like Kavanaugh saying the other day, I'm not going to I'm still going to do this process, I'm not going anywhere kind of rhetoric, the pressure needs to remain high. What tends to happen, at least from my perspective, what I've observed, is that people have short-term memories. The news cycle is short. So as soon as the next hot thing or the next big crisis or the next whatever happens, people are going to lose interest, or their attention is going to shift to something else, and the pressure won't remain strong. And that's what a lot of these folks count on, so that once the attention is focused elsewhere, then they can just go forward with whatever they did and never be brought to task for what they've done. So what I'm hoping and what I believe is the only way that anything of significance will ever change is if people continue to hold their feet to the fire and push for those excuses and those sort of dodging sort of answers and behaviors to not be accepted, and to be like, no, you need to answer the question. You can't just say you did nothing and now we suddenly have to believe you, or just, let it go. So I feel like that's part of it. The other piece is actually through the judicial process, because you also see cases like with the Stanford swimmer, where the victim spoke up. He had his day in court. He was convicted, but it seemed as though in that case, a lot of the controversy was not only around the actions of the athlete, but around the judge's behavior, not wanting to damage the young boy. Yet meanwhile, the female victim's life was ruined, but he didn't seem to have as much care and concern for her. So that also, I think, not necessarily falls so much into the victim blaming basket, but it certainly falls into the basket of making it less likely that victims will want to even say anything, because they see that when their accusers are brought to justice, they really aren't getting justice. And they themselves are then dragged through the mud while they have to relive, retell, recount all of their experience, only for someone to get slapped with probation or maybe a couple of months in jail, because the judge is more concerned with the well-being and welfare of that individual, that male abuser, than the victim. So I can understand why women don't want to speak up. Or victims, not just women, but victims.
Victims in general. Mm-hmm. And to piggyback off of what you said, you were seeing this in the Cosby case now. People were like, well, the man is 81 years old. I don't give a damn if he has 1 day left of life. You're going to spend that 1 day in jail. Just as you were saying, there's this whole concern for the perpetrator of the crime as opposed to the victim of the crime. So yeah, in a sense that it's victim, it is a victim blaming. So not direct, but indirect victim blaming. So like, oh, well, he has his whole life ahead of him, or he only has 2 days left, or she only has 2 days left. Well, you're going to spend your whole life or those 2 days in prison. And because of society's attitudes like that, that's the thing. It's always been preserving the male stance, preserving the male gaze, preserving the male ego when it comes to that. That's what it's always been. So even if you got just something like Hillary Clinton was talking about when she got into law school, somebody behind her said they were trying to get into law school or something, sitting for the exam, and a male student behind her said, he said, well, why are you here? I really need to get in. Because I'm a male, I need to get in. So there's also this level of audacity, male audacity, I like to call it. So,
Tell it.
I'm just saying, there's male audacity, there's white audacity. So there's this audacity of deference to the male because he is male. So simply because he is male, he is afforded all these things, including benefit of the doubt, including the chance to live out a normal life despite what you do. So this is the thing that is so troubling with that line of thinking.
Exactly.
I just want to shout out to Divine Right, saying to piggyback on what's said, this is only the beginning. There are so many women who have not or are afraid to open up, but will get the courage to do so. Many more are going to come out of the woodwork. It's time. She also adds, a friend of mine just told her story today on Facebook, 16 years later. She said she is empowered to come out and say something.
Exactly. And it goes back to the point that Tachi made earlier about how in the day when a lot of the crimes were being committed, in the case of Weinstein or in the case of Cosby, it was during an era where you don't say anything because you are immediately going to be asked, well, what were you wearing? What were you doing? Were you drinking? Were you alone? Why didn't you go home with your friends? Were you under the influence? So immediately going to attack the heart of the victim and attack the victim's character and credibility. But now the pendulum has shifted a bit towards, it's all right for you to tell your story. And in fact, you should tell your story because you aren't the only one and we can support you. And there's power in numbers, there's strength in numbers. And we can save, if we can save even one other person from being victimized by you sharing your story, then you should do it. And I feel like now because that atmosphere is kind of more prevalent, and it seems like it still has a lot of momentum. I think more women feel empowered to tell their stories, as Divine Right's example shows. And it's funny that she had that experience, because I too had a friend today basically come out, so to speak, on Facebook and share her story of why she didn't report when she was victimized, and it happened 16, 17 years ago. And it's a different friend from Divine Right, even though me and Divine Right have many of the same friends because we're friends. But it's a different friend, which is, it's sad because it shows how widespread this really is. And I read some really upsetting statistic the other day when I was just reading up a little bit on this subject, that really 2 out of every 3 women have experienced some sort of sexual abuse.
Wow.
If not more. And I'm not talking about extreme examples of like rape or incest or, you know, things that are much more egregious. It could just be something as simple as catcalling or groping on a train that's crowded and you don't know who did it. But 2 out of 3, that's crazy.
Wow. Wow.
Really crazy. And that's regardless of age, regardless of race. That's just being a female. And to me, that's really troubling. And as a mom, it's really disturbing, because it lets me know that I cannot protect my daughter from unwanted attention from men.
Well,
that bothers me.
Just want to shout out Melvin Lars is saying, "Good evening, ladies. Hope you're doing great." He's listening live via audio stream. So thank you, Melvin. Again, if you have any questions, comments, please share them, and Black Lady Magic will take care of them right quick.
Yes, we will.
I'm just thinking about, and it's so unfortunate because earlier this year, and I know you ladies may not know or keep aware of everything, prominent football coach, what's the guy's name now? I'm forgetting, for Ohio State, Urban Myers. Yeah. Long story short, he basically, in a press conference, said to the media that, you know, he didn't report or he didn't remember, you know, one of his assistants doing some wrong things towards his wife, to the point he got suspended for 3 games for covering this up. And it seems so much still that maybe society, maybe the judicial system cares more about keeping the status of the perpetrator rather than what's been afflicted on the victim.
Yeah, that's exactly what the point that I was making when I talked about the Stanford case, where, you know, and unfortunately, I don't believe that that's an isolated case. I think that's just a case that we knew about because it was covered in the media, and because it created such a furor, where the judge was more concerned with the well-being of the perpetrator than he was of the victim, who basically was saying, you know, how can you care about the impact that him paying for his crimes will have on the rest of his life? I will be scarred by this experience for the rest of my life, and I'm not getting justice. And that, unfortunately, I think is a mentality that goes beyond that one judge in that one case. I mean, you just cited another one in the case of Ohio, and unfortunately, I think that is part of the problem. It's deep-seated, and that's why I thought of this topic as a societal issue, because it really is, and it is within both the judicial system and outside of it. And it's perpetuated through the way in which we raise our children, the things that we see, not just in the media, but in our own families, when we know, for instance, that cousin maybe had some negative experience, but they never told anybody. Or, you know, it just is perpetuated both, you know, in subconscious and conscious ways every day. And that's why I feel like even a start is to give voice to it, and for victims to feel like they do have a space that's safe and a platform so that they can share these stories. And so the abuse isn't necessarily normalized, but it's vocalized. Because if we can all sort of hear what is happening, then more of us can be upset about it, do something about it, and be the change we want to see. Because as you pointed out earlier, Dr. Vibe, it ain't happening by our leadership. They're not making the decisions. I don't see laws being made. I don't see legislation being passed. I don't see sentencing being more strict to make a point, to be a deterrent for that type of future behavior in others. So it's another one of those things where I think that it's going to have to start at the grassroots level.
Dr. Tachi, I want to get your perspective on something that makes me shake my head. I watched a brief clip from CNN earlier this week, and the reporter was asking a group of women about the Kavanaugh case and about the lady who's going to be testifying tomorrow. And basically they said, she's lying. And I'm going, whoa. I'm going, really? Like, you're not even giving a chance? And that's where I get a more of a concern. And I know we don't like to get political, but does it not concern you that there is a group of ladies out there that do not pay attention to victim blaming? They think basically the victim is not telling the truth. Conviction before, and both sides of the case, but I would think if you're a lady, you take, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm out of touch, but why is there not more support or unity amongst women when it comes to victim blaming?
Well, when you look at it, A, it's concerning but not surprising. B, these women are also victims of societal brainwashing. So they're only acting upon the world in the ways that they've been socialized to act upon the world. And that is that women's lives are worth less than men's. If something happens, you somehow caused it. You are the antecedent for this somehow. And so that is what you internalize. And so this is why women often are the loudest voices when it comes to these things in terms of, well, you should have, and why didn't you, and this is your fault. Look at, and again, we don't want to get political because we know we don't do politics. But when you look at the people who put the person who currently lives in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in office, it was largely white women.
Well, okay, I just want to interrupt you there. Interesting enough, 52% of white women voted for that gentleman in the last election. Leah, stay out of this. So,
I'm not saying anything.
There you go.
Well, I will say one thing though. The only thing that I will say is midterms are coming up, folks. Primary elections are taking place. If you haven't already registered to vote, I encourage you to do that.
I think, and it's going to be very interesting. It's a little more than a month away. Midterms. More women are running for office than ever.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Mm-hmm. That tells you right now. I mean, more women than ever, more minorities than ever. We're already seeing cases like in New York of the young Latina millennial who just, in an upset victory beat somebody else. You saw in, the gubernatorial race in New York State where Cynthia Nixon was beaten out by Cuomo, but the fact that a woman gave him a run for his money shows that there's a demographic that wants change. And if they're not going to get it from their elected officials, they're going to be their own elected officials. And I really hope that trend continues.
I think people, go ahead, Tachi. Go ahead.
I think people are tired of the okie doke. And the biggest thing is that when people are tired enough of their condition, they'll change their condition. So it will be very interesting to see the results of this, of the midterm elections, definitely. But, going back to the whole thing is that these women are victims. I'm not saying that they are victims in the same way that they are, but they're victims of society, of societal brainwashing. They've internalized it. And this has been over centuries. It's very difficult to break down the walls or institutions of oppression that have existed for centuries and convince people otherwise. That's very difficult. That's the reason we still have slave mentalities today, or slave mentalities still exist, because it's difficult to break down those walls. So while, and again, every oppressor has collaborators. They have to in order to continue to oppress. That's why this continues to go on. So not only do they have collaborators in terms of people who don't see something and don't say anything, but also those people who believe it to be the case that somehow it's the fault of the women.
All right.
Or men.
Because we had some technical difficulties on the front end, we're going to have to end it right there, folks. I'm so sorry. But a few things. I'm just going to read some final comments. Melvin Lars makes a good comment here saying, the double standard of men protecting their mothers and disrespecting women at large is very disturbing.
Yes.
Next
good point.
Yes, and Melvin says, Tachi is right on point. Divine Right is saying, yes, when my friend voiced what happened, so many people said they have her back, that we will help her. I hope, however, that this will be brought to justice. And to flip the scripts, it's happening to men. Had a former friend who never told a soul until he was around 30 that abuse happened to him as a child, praying he got help, and by the time he told the abuser, had abused others. It tore his friend up, and then what happens is some feel bad about they didn't say something sooner. When it happens, it's very hard. Very
It
true.
is.
Very, very true. That's it tonight, Joe. It's going to be quick tonight. If you want, we can continue part 2 next week. So definitely shout out to either myself or Dr. Tachi or Leah if you want part 2. But we will let them get their contact information before they sign out. First up, Leah.
Okay. Thanks for joining us again tonight. For me, you can find me pretty much across the internet as Leah World Traveler. That's LIA World Traveler. On Instagram, Facebook, my own blog, and Twitter. And you can also find me on LinkedIn as Leah Miller. But it's LIA World Traveler.
Dr. Tachi.
I am at Tachiada, TACHIADA, on Twitter and Periscope. You can also find me on Instagram as Dr_Tachi. And I host a show on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Periscope and Facebook Live called Mediascope. We talk all about media, tech, and pop culture, so you can tune into that. And you can tune into the podcast that I do called TV Channeling with a good friend and co-host, Kevin Williams in LA. And that is at tvchanneling.com, also on Stitcher, iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, TuneIn Radio, and a bunch of other places. But easy, find us on tvchanneling.com.
And was it Kevin's birthday recently?
Yeah, Kevin's birthday was like last week, so yeah.
Happy belated, Kevin.
Yes, happy belated to him.
I'm Dr. Vibe, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, the home of epic conversations and the place of epic conversations. If you want to watch replays of my YouTube conversations, you're at the place. If you want to listen to replays of my audio epic conversations, the drvibeshow.com, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, Google Play Music, TuneIn Radio, selected audio replays at WJMS Radio out of New York City, and the Goodman Project, and Amazon Alexa. If you would like a complimentary empowerment session, touch base with me. Twitter at drvibeshow, email address dr.vibe@the drvibeshow.com, or go to my website, go to the top, click on Connect with Dr. Vibe or Contact Dr. Vibe. You'll be able to email me or send an audio message right there. If you are a business or entrepreneur and you would like to get some media promotion, I run a service called Getting Media Coverage, where I help businesses and entrepreneurs get media promotion so they can elevate their business, product, or service. I will be appearing November 17th and 18th as MC of the Men and Women's Conference on Masculinity. Guest speaker is Warren Farrell, talking about the boy crisis. Finally, live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. And finally, block assumptions. Thanks to Divine Right. Thanks to Melvin Lars. Thanks to anyone else who's watching this live on the replay. And we'll be back for a longer period next week. Aim bigger, aim higher, aim wider, aim stronger. God bless, peace be well, keep the faith, and walk good. And Tachi's taking over Atlanta. Bye.